Hello, it's Randy Wilt. Today we're talking about global crisis management, and we're actually going to be talking about the role of the global supply chain and how it affects the way we look at what's going on before, let's actually say post-COVID in that. To kind of start, let's talk about just a moment what a company has to do to really be successful in global supply chain. First of all, how they resource materials, how they produce goods, how they deliver the products, and how they do all this across international borders with the speed and efficiency. Now, a couple of things to look at first, these four items here. So when you're looking at supply chain, particularly globally, you have to think about the resourcing, maybe resourcing through multiple countries. How do you support your system so your economies of scale really works good for you and your company? How you look at trying to lower the cost of production by looking for lower labor costs? How do you achieve those faster innovations through maybe the exchange of knowledge in a different country, using the skills of those different countries, and of course using technology? But let's talk about COVID, and not so much COVID, but the post-COVID, because our supply chain was not particularly doing that poor. It was actually doing great till we hit COVID and everything started to shut down. We stopped all that transportation. We have a lot of vulnerabilities that were exposed to us. And now, how are we moving forward? What are companies doing as they're coming outside that post-COVID era of the past probably 3 years? Well, they're looking at those multinational companies. They're looking at how to adapt in various ways. The first one we'll talk about is transportation. Now, we know what transportation is. We know how, planes, trains, automobiles. Okay, we're not necessarily using automobiles in the shipping in there. But companies are having to look at this a little differently because they're having to look at how to diversify their network, how to use different forms of transportation, how to increase those regional hubs instead of one hub having various different hubs, how to spread their warehousing out because of lack of infrastructure in countries, and then how to increase the reshoring, the nearshoring to bring those products closer back to home so they have a shorter distance to get to the clients. Next of all, let's talk about the sourcing. Now, sourcing basically, as we know, is going and getting things. And one of the problems we have is that countries have been using single source suppliers instead of using multi-source suppliers. That could be multi-parts coming from different parts. Let's say the airplane, the engine's coming from one place, the wings another place, the wheels are another place. It could be sourced multi. But I want to talk about the multi-sourcing in terms of countries, because we in the U.S. have moved primarily, even though we had NAFTA out there, we've been moving closer and closer over to China, even though we have been spreading out some. But now there's a new strategy called the China Plus One. I say new, it's not that new. It's been around, but it's getting stronger. And we're seeing a lot of this happening now, particularly as we're going into 2025 with the new presidential administration. Now, all China One Plus One strategy means that don't just use China, use other countries too, Indonesia, Vietnam, India. In our case, it could, and that's Asia, but in our case, it could be Mexico, it could be Central America, places like that. Now, why is this so important? It's because China has so many issues that we are concerned about. Number one, those geopolitical issues. Is a communist government. I mean, they control their companies. Many of the companies they have ownership in. So that goes into point two, the regulatory issues. They can put in regulations. They can go in there and raise labor costs. And we're going to talk in a moment about those labor costs. And also, we get a little bit concerned because they don't meet our environmental issues. So there's various different things between the labor, the regulatory, the geopolitical that can affect us from wanting to use exclusively China in there. And besides that, there is a trade deficit. Look at this. Even back in 2020, the deficit with China was $283 billion. I mean, our imports were computers, cell phones, apparel. Okay, huge imports compared to commercial aircraft, automobiles, and soybeans. I don't know what the dollars are on soybeans, but down the very bottom, there's a little cutoff there. It says China owns 15% of our U.S. public debt. Now, as we go into the new administration, I have some of these type of slides buried through all my presentation today, is that to show you a little bit of a difference between the Biden and the Trump administration. The Biden administration, they did limit China, but they wanted to maintain a good trade relationship. So they kept the trade going. Now, Trump, when he comes in office, right off the bat, he says that he's going to impose these broader restrictions on China. He's going to raise the tariffs on China. Is that going to cause inflation? Yes, it will. But at the same time, he's going to increase pressure on industries like in electronics and consumer goods, textiles, to move those industries back to the U.S. and don't produce those items in China. So we're trying to bring things back to the U.S. Now we've talked about sourcing, we've talked about transportation. What are some of the other things these multinational companies are concerned with? First of all, labor issues. Labor is always an issue. Worldwide, I mean, we have lots of great labor laws here in the U.S. that are not being used in other parts of the world. We have labor laws about number of hours, about child labor, all these things that other countries are using. And one of the things that we can do as being a good global citizen is to enforce some of those labor laws abroad. Now, we've been doing that. I mean, there's no doubt about it, but we still see them falling between the pockets in certain areas. But if we can accelerate the adoption of AI in the manufacturing, that could reduce some of the labor issues that we're encountering, like child labor, excessive hour labors, reskilling local labor, helping them to be a little bit more skilled, and then to increase the technology of the production, like the 3D printing and also the automation. Now, this brings up the big question. Now, what is the big question? The big question is manufacturing coming back to the U.S.? Well, I think we know the answer to that is yes, it is. Matter of fact, here we go again. Look at the difference between the Biden and Trump administration. The Biden administration was focused on technology and green manufacturing with incentives for certain industries. Okay, that was good, but it just didn't go far enough. The Trump administration, of course, very strict tariffs, especially on China. Economic incentives for those companies coming back to the U.S. They're going to reshore, nearshore, and punitive tax consequences for companies relocating outside of the U.S. Now, one of the things that the Trump administration is trying to do is limit the corporate tax by helping people to come back. We did that once before. Everybody was moving over to, where was it, Ireland. They're moving to different areas. So he did get people to come back here. But now one of the things the Trump administration is talking about is not only keeping those taxes low, but actually increasing taxes if they are being producing products abroad and things. And you can see here, even going back to 2019, the reshoring compared to the FDI, the reshoring has already started to increase. So we're already on that path. We're just going to continue to increase it. Now, how and why is that supply chain returning to the U.S.? Well, various reasons. Once again, the U.S. is open. We're open for business. Biden administration, a little bit more toward that green industry. They did believe in the long-term reshoring, but they were very environmental focused and also looking at certain sectors. The Trump administration, they're encouraging this Buy American. Now, we've done that before, and they're going to do it again. And it's going to be interesting because we need to make sure we got the people there to build the parts here in America. We'll talk in a moment. And of course, also punitive action for companies who are electing to move their operation overseas instead of producing it here in the United States. Now, how and why is this going to happen? First of all, is that we do know that there is an increased labor cost in China. It's not as cheap as it was. That's why so many things are starting to move other areas. They're starting to move over to Vietnam or over to India. We're also very concerned about the theft of intellectual property in China. They've been known to steal our ideas, so we're very concerned about that. And then you see the third one there is we're starting to train more in terms of manufacturing. We're getting away from everybody's got to go to the college. Now we're sitting there saying you can be trained on a trade and move ahead very nicely in life. And we're seeing China already starting to lose their textile. They're starting to lose a little bit in electronics into Vietnam, Indonesia. And then we're starting to relax some of our regulations. We're increasing the energy in the U.S. We're going to see this a little bit more of the Trump administration. Now, here's just an interesting chart. You can see that look how much debt that China actually has. Their debt continues to grow. How is this happening? This is happening because they put so much money into African countries to build the infrastructure to make them committed to China. And now all that money is due back and those countries cannot pay China back. So China is building up their debt. How are they going to handle this debt? Probably by increasing labor costs. And this is starting to put a fear into the importers and the exporters. So working hard is important, but there is something that even matters more. I'm showing you my age on this here, but Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise said when something is important, you make the time for it. And that's why I'm making just a little time here to add to talk about the retraining, reskilling of the U.S. population. Because this is kind of meaningful to me because I'm in academics. But take a look at this chart here, how we're starting to see the enrollment in colleges dropping off. And matter of fact, this goes back to 2015. And look what happened here in 2023. We actually plummeted, particularly in the men, but we're seeing overall, people are not going to colleges. Well, why is that? Well, we know why. The cost of college is high. It's harder. People can't have these enormous college loans. It's harder sometimes to get a job. And take a look here. This is a map of the U.S. Now, this looks impressive, but I just want to point out to you, these are all the people with college degrees all throughout the country. There's really not that many. Look at Texas 317, where I am, and Arkansas 34,000. One of the things we know by the Bureau of Labor Statistics is that 40% of the American workforce is going to retire in the next 5 to 7 years. 68% of the employers out there are scared that they're not going to be able to replace them because, number one, people are not getting skills in college, but number two, they're not getting skills in trade schools. So they are graduating. Now, we do know the high schools are doing a little bit better on that, but this is an interesting little graph here because what this is actually showing you is that there, and this is actually 2022, you can see we're not putting out near the number of college degrees. We're seeing a lot of high school and less than high school that is so much further than the college degrees, even the associate degrees. Now, is this good or this bad? Well, I kind of think it's a little bit of both. I think it's good and bad. The bad part is we are losing some of those skills, but the good part is as long as those skills are going into trade schools, that's important. Because if you get a degree or get an education in a trade school, what it tells us, they go out with less debt, they have a better chance of finding a job right away, and their program is shorter. As you can see things here, the average salary for a skilled trade, $65,000. That is right there with a bachelor's degree. You can see by this little chart here, diagram, you can see the trade workers. Transportation, that's good. Construction, but look at the production side of it. We are now seeing that we are starting to grow people to be in manufacturing. This is something that's new. Now, has this just all of a sudden appeared? No. We've been working on this. Matter of fact, if you go back to the 1990s, Dan Muse-Hull, I know him extremely well. He's my cousin. That's how I know him. He worked for a company that put together what we call the tech prep, which was educating people how to move people with the education department into these trade schools. He was actually housed at Baylor University. And you can see some of the books he wrote back then, Opening Minds, Opening Doors, Tech Prep, Career Pathways. Who are you calling stupid? The whole idea was if 1990s, if we don't educate our kids to go into trade, and trade also means manufacturing, that could be welding, it could be all types of things, we will have a shortfall and we will not have those people in the trade. And what will happen? We'll move it abroad. And that's exactly what we did. We moved the manufacturing to overseas to other countries. So Dan Hull basically said, if we don't train them now and build up our local manufacturing people to have those people coming employed in manufacturing, we will send it abroad. And thank goodness we kind of took his advice, and we're now bringing people, we're training people here. And that's going to really bring the manufacturing back to the U.S. So the old question was, is it coming back? Yes, it is. And fortunately, we'll have the people to do it too. So like I says, my concluding thoughts here is that companies are returning to the U.S. China's losing their market. They're losing to other Asian countries. They're in debt. it's going to cause their salaries of their people to go up, and we're going to find more countries moving things away from China. We're seeing this resurgent in growing in the U.S. We're doing very carefully. In those tariffs under the Trump administration, is it going to raise inflation? Yes, I'm afraid it will, but it's going to create this Buy America. And that's kind of where we need to be. I appreciate you spending time with me today, listening to my presentation. We'll talk to you again.